Marina spoke her first Portuguese words to win the billionaire CEO's $1 million wage, her voice trembling with defiance and desperation. Across the restaurant, an elderly stranger began to weep, hearing in Marina's voice the sister she had abandoned 6 decades ago. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. There are moments in life when the universe conspires to place you exactly where you need to be, even if it feels like the last place on earth you want to exist. For Marina Santos, a 26-year-old server at the prestigious Grandeur restaurant, that moment arrived on a humid Thursday evening when the crystal chandeliers cast their golden glow over white tablecloths, and the air hummed with the quiet confidence of old money. She had no way of knowing that the arrogant laugh echoing from Table 7 would become the catalyst for a reckoning that would shake the foundations of one of the city's most powerful corporate empires. She certainly couldn't have predicted that a language she'd spent years trying to forget would become her weapon, her shield, and ultimately her key to unlocking a truth that had been buried for nearly 3 decades. The Grandeur wasn't just a restaurant. It was a statement, a temple where the wealthy came to worship at the altar of exclusivity and perfectly seared Wagyu beef. Marina had worked there for 18 months, long enough to recognize the regularity of power, to understand the silent language of those who never looked at price tags and never said please. The tips were extraordinary. Enough to cover her grandmother's mounting medical expenses and the rent on their small apartment in the city's forgotten corners. But the cost of those tips was her dignity, served up nightly alongside Bordeaux and truffle risotto. She moved through the dining room with the practiced grace of someone who had learned to make herself invisible. A shadow in a crisp white shirt and black vest that seemed designed to erase individuality. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, her face carefully neutral, her accent buried so deep that most people assumed she was just another American girl working her way through college. They didn't know about the grandmother who raised her in a tiny house in São Paulo, teaching her Portuguese lullabies and the pride of their heritage. They didn't know about the father she'd never met or the mother who died bringing her into this world. They didn't know that Marina Santos was a ghost haunting her own life, serving champagne to people who would never see her as anything more than a transaction. Table 7 was hosting 4 men in suits that probably cost more than Marina made in 6 months. They'd arrived precisely at 8 o'clock. Filling the corner booth with the kind of aggressive masculine energy that made the other diners instinctively lower their voices. The man at the head of the table was clearly the alpha, mid-40s with salt and pepper hair styled with surgical precision, a jawline that suggested regular sessions with a personal trainer, and eyes the color of Arctic ice. His name, Marina had learned from the reservation system, was Richard Blackwood, CEO of Blackwood Industries, a multinational corporation that seemed to have its fingers in everything from tech to real estate to pharmaceuticals. His companions were clearly subordinates, laughing too hard at his jokes, nodding too enthusiastically at his pronouncements. Marina recognized the dynamic immediately. She'd seen it 1,000 times. These were men who had traded their autonomy for proximity to power, who measured their worth by how close they could sit to the sun without getting burned. Richard Blackwood was holding court, and they were his eager audience, desperate for scraps of approval. Marina approached the table with her notepad and her practiced smile, the one that never quite reached her eyes. "Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to the Grandeur. Can I start you with some drinks this evening?" Her voice was pleasant, professional, utterly devoid of personality. Richard Blackwood didn't even look up from his phone. His fingers moved across the screen with the kind of casual authority that suggested the entire world was contained within that small glowing rectangle. Finally, he glanced up, his eyes sweeping over Marina with all the interest one might give to a piece of furniture. He said, his voice carrying the particular kind of dismissiveness that came from a lifetime of being obeyed without question, "Dom Perignon 2008, and make sure it's properly chilled. I don't want to taste anything but perfection." One of his companions, a younger man with nervous energy and a tie that was just slightly too bright, leaned forward with a laugh. "You hear that, Richard? Nothing but perfection. That's why you're the boss." The sycophantic comment earned a thin smile from Blackwood. Marina wrote down the order, her pen moving across the pad in neat, efficient strokes. "Of course, sir. I'll have that out for you right away." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her cold. Wait, there was something in his tone, a shift from dismissive to deliberately cruel that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She turned back, her expression carefully neutral. "Yes, sir?" He was staring at her now, really staring, as if he just noticed she was an actual human being rather than a service robot. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "You know what?" he said, his voice rising just enough to catch the attention of nearby tables. "I'm bored with the usual routine. Let's make this evening interesting." He leaned back in his chair, the picture of casual power, one arm draped over the leather booth. "I have a challenge for you." Marina felt a cold prickle of unease slide down her spine. "Sir?" Blackwood's smile widened. "Here's the deal. If you can serve our entire meal tonight speaking only Portuguese, perfect Portuguese, mind, I will personally give you $1 million. Cash, no strings attached." The table erupted in laughter, the kind of braying, cruel amusement that comes from men who have never been on the receiving end of humiliation. Marina stood frozen, her notepad pressed against her chest like a shield. The dining room around them had gone quiet, other guests craning their necks to see what the commotion was about. $1 million, Blackwood repeated, clearly enjoying the spectacle. 1 million. For a few hours of work. What do you say? Can you do it? Or are you just another pretty face who can barely manage English? The mockery was evident in every word. The challenge designed not as a genuine offer but as entertainment, a game to amuse powerful men at the expense of someone powerless. Marina's mind raced. $1 million. It was an absurd amount, the kind of money that could solve every problem in her life, that could give her grandmother the best medical care, that could free her from the endless cycle of exhaustion and barely making ends meet. But she knew men like Richard Blackwood. She'd served them for 18 months. They didn't give away money. They used it as a weapon, a way to humiliate, to demonstrate their superiority. She began, her voice catching slightly. One of the other men at the table, a heavy-set executive with a red face, leaned in conspiratorially. Come on, honey, don't tell me you're one of those diversity hires who can't even speak the language on your application. His companions erupted in fresh laughter. Blackwood held up a hand, silencing them with the ease of a conductor controlling an orchestra. No, let her answer. Maybe she's fluent. Maybe we're about to lose $1 million. His tone made it clear he believed no such thing. Marina looked at him, at the cruel amusement dancing in those ice-blue eyes, at the way his entire posture radiated the absolute certainty that she would either decline or fail spectacularly. She thought of her grandmother lying in a hospital bed 3 miles away, hooked up to machines that beeped a rhythm of borrowed time. She thought of her own reflection in the bathroom mirror every night, the exhaustion etched into features that used to be young and hopeful. She thought of her mother, whom she'd never known, and her father, who had disappeared before she was born, leaving behind nothing but questions and a Portuguese lullaby her grandmother sang when Marina couldn't sleep. And then, with a clarity that felt almost supernatural, she made her decision. Certainly, sir, she said in perfect, unaccented Portuguese, her voice suddenly carrying a musical quality that seemed to transform the very air around her. I accept your challenge. It would be my honor to serve you this evening in the language of my heritage. Shall I begin by recommending our finest wines? Or would you prefer to hear about tonight's specials first? The effect was instantaneous and electric. Richard Blackwood's smug expression froze, then cracked into something resembling genuine surprise. His companions fell silent, their laughter dying in their throats like small animals caught in a sudden frost. The other diners who had been watching the spectacle leaned in, intrigued by this unexpected turn. Marina stood before them, her spine straight, her chin lifted, no longer invisible, no longer a ghost. For the first time in 18 months, she was fully, completely, defiantly herself. Blackwood recovered quickly, his CEO training kicking in. He forced a laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes. Well, looks like we might have underestimated our server. His Portuguese was atrocious, mangled by an American accent that turned the beautiful language into something harsh and grating. But as he spoke, something else happened, something that would change everything. In the far corner of the restaurant, partially hidden behind an ornate silk screen, an elderly woman dining alone with her caretaker suddenly gasped, her hand flying to her chest. The woman was Sofia Almeida, 84 years old, a fixture at the grandeur who came every Thursday evening to sit in her favorite corner and remember better days. She had been a beauty once, a singer in São Paulo's most prestigious clubs, before life and circumstances had brought her to this country and this city. Her hearing was still sharp, though her body had grown frail, and the sound of Marina's voice speaking Portuguese had cut through her like a blade made of memory and impossible hope. That voice, she clutched her caretaker's arm with surprising strength. That voice, it can't be. It's not possible. Marina, focused entirely on Richard Blackwood and his challenge, didn't notice the old woman's reaction. She didn't see Sophia struggling to stand, didn't hear her urgent whispers to her caretaker. She was too busy maintaining her composure, too busy preparing for the performance of her life, too busy not thinking about what would happen when Blackwood inevitably found a way to deny her the money he'd promised. She had no idea that the universe had just aligned in a way that would unravel secrets buried for decades, that her voice, speaking the language of her ancestors, had just triggered a recognition that would expose lies, betrayals, and a truth so profound it would reshape her entire understanding of who she was and where she came from. Richard Blackwood was still talking, his words flowing in butchered Portuguese, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. But Marina wasn't listening anymore. She had caught a glimpse of movement in her peripheral vision. An elderly woman being helped to her feet, staring across the restaurant with an expression of such shock and desperate hope that it made Marina's breath catch in her throat. Their eyes met across the dining room, and in that instant something passed between them. Recognition without understanding, connection without explanation, a pull as ancient and inevitable as gravity itself. Marina forced her attention back to table 7, to Richard Blackwood and his expectant, mocking audience. She could feel the weight of the entire restaurant's attention now. The curious stares of other diners, the concerned glances from her fellow servers who had paused in their duties to watch this unexpected drama unfold. The challenge had been issued, accepted, and now she had to deliver. But that elderly woman's face, that expression of shocked recognition, lingered in her mind like an afterimage burned into her retinas. She pushed it aside. She had to focus. $1 million hung in the balance, even if she suspected it was a lie, a cruel joke that would end with her humiliation and Blackwood's triumphant laughter. She returned turned her attention to the table, her Portuguese flowing with the natural ease of someone who had spoken it before she'd learned to walk. Gentlemen, our sommelier recommends the Chateau Margaux if you're considering red wine with your meal. Or if you prefer white, we have an exceptional Montrachet that pairs beautifully with our seafood selection. Her voice carried a melodic quality that Portuguese possessed, a softness that English lacked, each word rolling off her tongue with the comfort of home. Blackwood's companions exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable. They had expected entertainment, a server stumbling over foreign words, maybe mixing up grammar, definitely failing. Instead, they were confronted with fluency that made their boss's challenge seem less like a clever game and more like a potential costly mistake. Blackwood's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Marina caught it, that micro-expression of a man realizing he might have underestimated his opponent, but he recovered with the speed of someone who had built an empire on never showing weakness. "Impressive," he said in English, abandoning his butchered Portuguese. "Very impressive. But speaking a few wine recommendations is easy. Let's see how you handle the entire evening. I want my order taken in Portuguese, my questions answered in Portuguese, every interaction in flawless Portuguese. One word of English, one grammatical error, and the deal is off. Understood?" Marina met his gaze directly, something she'd been trained never to do with demanding customers. But the rules had changed the moment she'd accepted his challenge. "Perfeitamente compreendido, Senor." "Perfectly understood, sir. I assure you that my Portuguese is as native as my heartbeat. It was my first language, the language of my grandmother who raised me, the language of my blood. You will have no cause for complaint." There was a steel in her voice now, a dignity that couldn't be bought or sold, that came from somewhere deeper than professionalism. She was no longer just a server, she was a warrior, and the battlefield was language itself. "What is your grandmother's name?" The question came from behind her, quavering but insistent. Marina turned to find the elderly woman from the corner approaching slowly, one hand gripping a polished wooden cane, the other clutching her caretaker's arm. Up close, Sofia Almeida was striking despite her age. Her face was lined with the map of a long life, but her eyes were sharp, dark, and swimming with an emotion Marina couldn't identify. Tears? Fear? Hope? The old woman's gaze was fixed on Marina with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable, as if she were trying to see through flesh and bone into something deeper, something hidden. Marina hesitated, thrown by the interruption, by the naked vulnerability in the stranger's face. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but I'm currently serving these gentlemen." Blackwood waved a hand dismissively. "Let the old woman speak. Maybe she wants to referee our little game." His companions chuckled, but the sound was nervous now, uncertain. The energy in the restaurant had shifted. Something was happening that none of them understood. Something that felt larger than a cruel wager about language skills. Sofia ignored Blackwood entirely, her focus solely on Marina. "Your voice," she said in Portuguese, her words carrying a Paulista accent that spoke of São Paulo's upper-class neighborhood, of a generation that had known both wealth and loss. "Your voice is exactly like someone I knew many years ago, a voice I thought I would never hear again, except perhaps in dreams or madness. Tell me, child, what is your grandmother's name?" The question wasn't casual curiosity. It was desperate, urgent, the kind of question that carried the weight of decades. Marina felt her heart begin to race. Why was this stranger asking about her avo? What did an elderly, wealthy woman dining at the grandeur possibly have to do with her family, with her past? "Maria Santos," she answered, the words coming out almost against her will. "My grandmother is Maria Helena Santos. She lives in the care facility on 14th Street. She's been there for 6 months since her stroke." Even as she spoke, Marina wondered why she was revealing such personal information to a stranger. But something about Sofia's intensity demanded truth. The effect of those words on Sofia Almeida was profound and immediate. The old woman's legs seemed to give out, and her caretaker barely caught her, easing her into the nearest chair. Sofia's hand trembled as she pressed it to her mouth, and tears began to stream down her weathered cheeks. "Maria Helena," she whispered, the name emerging like a prayer. "Maria Helena Santos. My God, after all these years, after everything." She looked up at Marina, and her expression was a complex tapestry of joy and grief, wonder, and ancient pain. "Child, does your grandmother ever speak of her family? Of where she came from before São Paulo? The sister she lost?" Marina's world tilted slightly on its axis. A sister? Her grandmother had never mentioned a sister. Maria Helena Santos had always said she was alone in the world. An orphan who had built her life from nothing, who had raised Marina alone after tragedy took her daughter. There was no extended family, no relatives to call on holidays, no stories of siblings or parents. Just Maria, Helena, and Marina against the world, two women bound by love and circumstance and the Portuguese language that connected them to a homeland Marina had never seen. "I don't understand," Marina said, her professional composure cracked. "My grandmother never mentioned a sister. She has no family except me. You must be mistaken." But even as she said it, even as she tried to deny the connection, Marina felt the truth of it resonating in her bones. There was something about this woman, about the shape of her eyes, curve of her cheekbones, something that whispered of shared DNA, of family secrets, of stories deliberately left untold. Sofia reached out with a shaking hand and grasped Marina's wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong for someone so frail. "Not mistaken, child. Never mistaken. I would know my sister's voice anywhere, even if it comes from her granddaughter's throat. Maria Helena was my younger sister. We were separated 56 years ago, separated by choices I made, by pride and foolishness and circumstances that seemed impossible to overcome. I have searched for her for decades, but she vanished into a new life, a new name perhaps. Santos was not our family name. She took it to hide, I think, to protect herself from the past I represented. Blackwood's voice cut through the moment like a knife. Touching as this family reunion might be, I believe we have a challenge in progress, unless our server would like to forfeit. He was clearly irritated that his entertainment had been hijacked by this unexpected drama, that the spotlight had shifted away from his power play. Marina looked at him, at his cold eyes and cruel smile, and then back at Sophia, at this woman who claimed to be her great-aunt, who held secrets about her grandmother's hidden past. Marina made a decision. She gently extracted her wrist from Sophia's grip. "Senora," she said in Portuguese, her voice gentle but firm, "I need to complete my work this evening. This gentleman has issued a challenge that could change my life, that could pay for my grandmother's medical care, for the treatment she desperately needs. When my shift ends, I will come to you. We will talk. We will unravel this mystery together. But right now, I must focus. I must win this game, not for pride, but for survival." Sophia nodded, understanding blooming in her ancient eyes. "Of course, child, of course. But know this. If you are truly Maria Helena's granddaughter, if you carry her voice in her blood, then you carry strength you don't even realize. Win your game, and then we will speak of family, of secrets, and of a man named Antonio Blackwood who destroyed 2 sisters and thought he could bury the truth forever." At the mention of that name, at the surname Blackwood, Marina's eyes snapped to Richard at the table. His expression had changed. The mockery replaced by something harder, more calculating. He had heard his family name spoken by this old woman, and suddenly the evening's entertainment had become something else entirely. Something dangerous. Richard Blackwood's composure cracked for just a fraction of a second, a micro-expression that Marina caught because she had learned to read the faces of powerful men, to anticipate their needs and navigate their moods. His eyes hardened, his jaw clenched, and something that looked remarkably like fear flickered across his features before the mask of arrogant control snapped back into place. He knew that name, Antonio Blackwood. It meant something to him. Something he didn't want exposed in a crowded restaurant with witnesses and smartphones ready to capture any scandal that might emerge from the evening's strange theater. Sophia's caretaker, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and the practical demeanor of someone who had seen too much to be surprised by anything, gently guided the elderly woman back toward their corner table. But Sophia's gaze remained locked on Marina, and in that look was a promise. This conversation was not over. It was merely postponed. Marina watched them retreat, her mind spinning with questions that had no answers. A sister her grandmother never mentioned? A separation 56 years ago? And most disturbing of all, the invocation of the Blackwood name, spoken with such venom that it transformed a simple family reunion into something darker, something that suggested old wounds and older betrayals. She turned back to table 7, forcing herself into the role she had perfected over 18 months, the professional server, the invisible woman, except she was no longer invisible. And the challenge that had begun as Richard Blackwood's cruel entertainment had transformed into something far more complex. "Gentlemen," she said in Portuguese, her voice steady despite the emotional earthquake that had just rearranged her internal landscape. "Shall I take your orders now, or would you prefer a few more moments to review the menu?" Blackwood leaned back in his chair, studying her with the clinical interest of a scientist examining an unexpected specimen. His earlier mockery had been replaced by something more dangerous: calculation. He was a man who had built an empire by identifying threats and neutralizing them before they could grow into problems. And Marina, in the span of 10 minutes, had gone from amusing distraction to potential threat. She could see him thinking, connecting dots, wondering what the old woman had meant about Antonio Blackwood, wondering what secrets his family's past might contain. "Tell me," he said, switching to Portuguese but speaking slowly, deliberately, as if testing her. "How long have you worked at the grandeur?" Marina recognized the tactic. He was trying to gather information, to assess her, to determine if she was part of some elaborate setup. "Sir," she replied smoothly, "I have been employed here for 18 months. I began in the spring of last year, shortly after my grandmother's first hospitalization. The job provides the income necessary for her care." She let the information hang there, a subtle reminder that she had stakes in this game, that the money he'd offered wasn't abstract, it was survival. "And your grandmother," he pressed, "never mentioned the Almeida family? Never spoke of a past connected to mine?" The question was casual, but Marina heard the tension beneath it. She shook her head. "My grandmother spoke very little of her past, senor. She focused on the present, on raising me, on building a life in this country. Our history was Portuguese lullabies and family recipes, not names and old grievances. Whatever happened before I was born, she chose to leave it buried. Until tonight, apparently." One of Blackwood's companions, the nervous young executive with the too bright tie, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Boss, maybe we should just order and forget this whole challenge thing. This is getting weird." Blackwood's head swiveled toward him with the precision of a predator noticing movement. The younger man actually flinched. "We will do no such thing," Blackwood said in English, his voice carrying a warning. "A challenge was issued and accepted. We will see it through to its conclusion." He looked back at Marina, switching again to Portuguese. "Unless our server wishes to forfeit, it was a test and out." an opportunity for her to back down, and Marina knew that if she took it, if she walked away now, she would never know the truth about her grandmother's past, never understand the connection between her family and the Blackwood Empire, never have the resources to save the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise her. She met his gaze, her spine straightening, and spoke in Portuguese that rang with quiet defiance. "I do not forfeit, Senor Blackwood. I made a commitment and I honor my commitments. Unlike some people, apparently." The barb landed. She saw it in the tightening around his eyes, the slight compression of his lips. His companions shifted uncomfortably. The entire restaurant seemed to be holding its breath. Marina had just challenged a billionaire CEO in his own language in front of witnesses, with an implication that his family's honor was questionable. It was professional suicide, assuming she survived the evening with her job intact. But something had shifted in her when Sophia mentioned Antonio Black. A door had opened in her mind, revealing a corridor of secrets she hadn't known existed, and she would walk down that corridor no matter what it cost her. "Very well," Blackwood said, his voice dropping to a dangerous purr. "Then let us proceed. I will have the filet mignon, rare, with the truffle reduction, asparagus, no potato, and another bottle of the Dom Perignon. My companions will also order, and you will remember every detail without writing anything down." In Portuguese. Perfectly. One mistake, one hesitation, and you lose everything. Marina smiled. A real smile this time, not the practiced professional mask. She tucked her notepad into her apron pocket. "As you wish, senor. Challenge accepted." For the next 20 minutes, Marina performed a feat of memory and linguistic skill that would have impressed a trained sommelier. 4 men, 4 complex orders with modifications and special requests, wine pairings and appetizer selections, all delivered in rapid-fire Portuguese while she stood at the table without notes. She repeated each order back flawlessly, her pronunciation perfect, her grammar impeccable, her confidence unshakable. The other diners had stopped even pretending to eat their own meals. They were watching the show, this unexpected drama unfolding in the heart of their exclusive sanctuary. Blackwood's companions looked increasingly uncomfortable. They had come for a power dinner, a chance to bask in their CEO's reflected glory and perhaps secure promotions or favorable assignments. Instead, they were watching their boss engage in psychological warfare with a server who was proving to be far more formidable than anyone had anticipated. The heavyset executive, the one who had made the crack about diversity hires, wouldn't even make eye contact with Marina now. He had seen which way the wind was blowing, and it wasn't in their favor. As Marina turned to leave with their orders, Blackwood spoke again. "Wait." She paused, looking back over her shoulder. "Yes, senor. One more thing," he said, his voice carrying across the quiet restaurant. "Ow. That old woman, Sophia Almeida. Do you know what she did for a living? What her connection to my family might have been?" Marina considered lying, considered claiming ignorance. But something told her that honesty in this moment was more valuable than deception. "I have no idea, senor. Until 10 minutes ago, I didn't know she existed. I didn't know my grandmother had a sister. I didn't know the Blackwood name had any significance beyond your own considerable fame." Blackwood studied her for a long moment, and Marina felt like she was being x-rayed, dissected, analyzed for any hint of deception. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Interesting, very interesting. You may go." Marina walked toward the kitchen, her legs steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Behind her, she heard Blackwood's voice, low and urgent, speaking in English to his companions. "Find out everything you can about Sophia Almeida and Maria Helena Santos. Family history, financial records, any connection to my grandfather Antonio. I want answers before dessert is served." In the kitchen, Marina leaned against the cool stainless steel counter, her heart pounding. Her best friend and fellow server Carmen rushed over immediately. "Girl, what the hell is happening out there? The entire restaurant is talking about you. That billionaire offered you $1 million? And some old lady is claiming to be your family?" Marina shook her head, trying to clear it. "I don't know, Carmen. I honestly don't know. But whatever it is, it's bigger than a stupid challenge. That man out there, Richard Blackwood, his family did something to mine. Something bad enough that my grandmother erased her entire past to escape it." The head chef, a temperamental Frenchman named Claude, barked orders in rapid-fire English and French, completely oblivious to the drama unfolding in his dining room. Marina moved mechanically, loading her tray with appetizers, checking wine temperatures, performing the familiar rituals of service while her mind raced. She thought about her grandmother, lying in that care facility, her mind fuzzy from the stroke, her memories locked behind damaged neural pathways. Had Maria Helena known this day might come? Had she feared it? Was that why she never spoke of her past, never mentioned a sister, never explained where she came from or who she had been before Marina was born? Marina picked up the laden tray and pushed back through the kitchen doors. The dining room greeted her like a stage, every eye tracking her movement. She was no longer a server. She was a performer in a drama whose script she didn't know, whose ending hadn't been written. She delivered the appetizers to table 7 with perfect Portuguese commentary, describing each dish's preparation and ingredients, recommending the order in which they should be enjoyed for maximum flavor impact. Blackwood watched her with hooded eyes, barely touching his food, clearly more interested in solving the puzzle she represented than in enjoying his meal. As she turned to leave, she caught Sophia's eye across the restaurant. The old woman raised her water glass in a small toast, a gesture of solidarity, of recognition, of something that transcended the decades of separation and silence. Marina understood in that moment that she was standing at a crossroads. Down one path lay safety, anonymity, the continuation of her small, difficult, but manageable life. Down the other lay truth, possibly dangerous truth, but truth nonetheless about who she was, where she came from, and what had been stolen from her family. She chose truth. She had already chosen it when she accepted Blackwood's challenge. Now she just had to survive long enough to claim it. The evening progressed with the surreal quality of a fever dream. Marina moved through the dining room serving table 7 with mechanical perfection. Every word in Portuguese, every gesture precise. Every interaction a small victory in a war she hadn't known she was fighting until tonight. Richard Blackwood had stopped trying to trip her up with impossible requests or rapid-fire questions. Instead, he watched her with the intensity of a chess master studying an opponent who had just made an unexpected move, trying to calculate all possible futures that might branch from this single strange evening. Between courses, during those brief moments when she retreated to the kitchen or the service station, Marina found herself intercepted by other servers, by the restaurant manager, even by some of the kitchen staff. Everyone wanted to know what was happening. Why a billionaire CEO had offered her $1 million, why an elderly society woman had claimed her as family. The gossip spread through the grandeur like wildfire, and Marina could feel the weight of dozens of eyes tracking her every movement. She had become the evening's main attraction, more compelling than any carefully prepared dish or rare vintage wine. The restaurant manager, a thin, nervous man named Gerald, who spent most of his time worrying about Yelp reviews and health inspections, pulled her aside during a lull. "Marina, I don't know what's going on out there, but whatever it is, don't screw this up. Blackwood is one of our most important clients. He spends more in a month than most people make in a year. If you're running some kind of scam," his voice dropped to an urgent whisper, "you need to stop now before it damages the restaurant's reputation." Marina looked at him, at his sweating forehead and anxious eyes, and felt a wave of contempt. Of course he was worried about the rich man's comfort, about protecting power rather than standing up for the server who had been publicly mocked and challenged. "I'm not running a scam, Gerald," she said quietly in English, allowing herself this one breach of her Portuguese commitment while away from the table. "I'm simply doing my job and accepting a challenge that was offered to me. If Senor Blackwood feels uncomfortable, perhaps he should reflect on why he thought it was appropriate to mock someone's heritage for his own entertainment." Gerald's face flushed. "Just be careful, that's all I'm saying. People like him, they don't make offers like that unless they're certain they'll win." Marina smiled without humor. Then perhaps it's time someone surprised him. She picked up the tray with their main courses and returned to the dining room. As she approached table 7, she noticed that one of Blackwood's companions, the nervous young executive, was on his phone, scrolling through something with intense concentration. He looked up as she arrived, and his expression was troubled. The food was placed with practiced elegance, each dish described in flowing Portuguese. The presentation perfect, the service impeccable. Marina had transcended mere competence. She was performing at a level that would have impressed the most demanding restaurant critics. And she was doing it entirely in her grandmother's language, the language of her blood, the language that had somehow triggered a recognition that was still reverberating through the evening like an earthquake's aftershocks. As she finished describing the last dish, the young executive cleared his throat. "Boss," he said in English, nervousness making his voice crack slightly, "I found something. You need to see this." He turned his phone so Blackwood could see the screen. Marina, still playing her role, stood beside the table as if waiting for further instructions, but her eyes caught the image on the phone. It was a photograph, old and slightly faded, scanned from what must have been a newspaper or magazine. Two young women stood side by side, both strikingly beautiful, both wearing evening gowns that spoke of the 1950s or early 60s. One of the women was clearly a younger Sofia Almeida, her dark hair swept up in an elegant style, her eyes bright with youth and confidence. The other woman, slightly shorter, with softer features but the same distinctive cheekbones and expressive eyes, had to be her sister, Marina's grandmother, Maria Helena. The caption beneath the photo was partially visible. Marina could make out fragments of text. "Almeida Sisters, Snow Polo Society, engagement announcement," and then a name that made her blood run cold. "Antonio Blackwood." Blackwood studied the image, his face unreadable. "Where did you find this?" he asked his subordinate. "Online archive of a Snow Polo newspaper from 1962, the young man replied. "I searched for Sofia Almeida and cross-referenced with your family name." "Boss, there's more. Apparently your grandfather was engaged to Sofia Almeida before he married your grandmother. The engagement was broken under," he paused, consulting his phone, "under mysterious and scandalous circumstances. The Almeida family was ruined financially shortly after. There are hints of a business deal gone wrong, allegations that were never proven, and then Sofia married some American businessman and moved to the States. The other sister, Maria Helena, disappeared from society completely. No records after 1963. Marina felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. Her grandmother had been part of São Paulo's high society, the woman who had raised her in poverty, who had worked as a seamstress and a house cleaner, who had scraped together every penny to feed and clothe her granddaughter. That woman had once been wealthy enough to appear in society pages, and Sophia had been engaged to Richard Blackwood's grandfather, the mysterious Antonio whose name she had spoken with such bitterness. The pieces were assembling themselves into a picture that Marina couldn't fully see yet. But the outline was becoming clearer, and it was ugly. Blackwood's eyes lifted from the phone to Marina's face. He saw that she had heard everything, that she was processing the same information he was. For a moment, the masks dropped on both sides. They weren't CEO and server anymore. They were two people standing on opposite sides of a chasm created by their grandparents' choices, by old sins and older secrets. And neither of them fully understood what had happened or why. "Did you know?" he asked in Portuguese, his voice stripped of its earlier mockery. "Did you know any of this before tonight?" Marina shook her head, not trusting her voice. Blackwood leaned back, his fingers drumming on the white tablecloth, a rare tell that suggested he was genuinely unsettled. "So we're both discovering family secrets in real time. How very democratic." He looked toward Sophia's corner, where the old woman sat watching them with an expression that was part hope, part dread, part grim determination. "She knows," he said. "She knows everything. Every ugly detail of what happened between our families." The heavy-set executive, emboldened by wine and curiosity, forward. "Boss, what are you gonna do? Are you still going to pay her if she completes the challenge?" Blackwood's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Pay her? I'm going to do more than that." He looked directly at Marina, and she saw something new in his eyes. Not contempt or amusement, but a kind of ruthless respect. "Miss Santos, you have fulfilled your end of our agreement admirably. Your Portuguese is flawless. Your service has been impeccable. You have earned your $1 million. His companions gasped, clearly not expecting him to actually follow through. But Blackwood continued, holding up one finger. "I have a counteroffer." Marina's heart sank. Here it came. The catch. The impossible condition. The way powerful men always found to avoid honoring their promises to people with no power. "I want the truth," Blackwood said, "about what happened between our grandparents, about why your grandmother fled her old life, about what my grandfather did that made Sophia Almeida speak his name like a curse after 60 years. He gestured to the empty seat at his table. "Sit down, not as a server, as an equal. When your shift ends, you and I are going to have a conversation with Senora Almeida, and we are going to excavate this buried history, whether it destroys both our families' reputations or not." Marina stared at him, shocked by the proposition. Gerald, the manager, was going to have a stroke if she sat at a guest table. The other servers would gossip for months. But more than that, she was shocked by the rawness in Blackwood's voice, the suggestion that he actually cared about truth more than protecting his family's carefully cultivated image. Maybe she had misjudged him, or maybe he was just shrewd enough to realize that Sophia Almeida could destroy him with whatever information she possessed, and it was better to control the revelation than to let it explode unpredictably. "I finish my shift in 90 minutes. Marina said carefully in Portuguese. "After that, I'm free, but I have conditions of my own." Blackwood's eyebrow raised. "You're negotiating with me?" Marina met his gaze steadily. "You offered me $1 million for a performance. I performed. But if we're going to dig up the past together, if we're going to confront whatever horror show our grandparents created, then I want more than money. I want the truth documented. I want protection for my grandmother from any fallout. And I want your word, your actual binding word, that whatever we discover, you won't use your wealth and power to bury it again." The table fell silent. Blackwood's companions looked like they wanted to crawl under their chairs. No one negotiated with Richard Blackwood. No one demanded terms from a man who could buy and sell lives with a phone call. But Marina was done being invisible. She was done being powerless. She had her grandmother's blood, and apparently that blood came from a family that had once walked in the same circles as the Blackwoods before. Something terrible had torn both families apart. Blackwood smiled, and for the first time that evening it reached his eyes. "You have courage, Miss Santos. Foolish courage, perhaps, but courage nonetheless. Very well, you have my word." He extended his hand across the table. "When you finish your shift, we'll talk, all three of us. And whatever we find, whatever ugly truth is buried in our shared past, we face it together. Deal." Marina looked at his outstretched hand, then at Sophia across the room, then down at her own hands that had served thousands of meals, that had worked themselves raw to care for her grandmother, that carried the same genetic code as a woman who had once been São Paulo society royalty. She reached out and shook Richard Blackwood's hand. Deal. The final 90 minutes of Marina's shift passed in a strange, suspended state between triumph and dread. She moved through the dining room like an automaton, serving other tables with her usual efficiency, but constantly aware of the weight of eyes on her back. Richard Blackwood and his companions had finished their meal, but instead of leaving as they normally would have, they remained at table 7, ordering coffee and cognac, clearly waiting for the promised conversation. Sophia Almeida had also stayed, her caretaker bringing her medications and a warm shawl as the evening stretched longer than usual. The old woman sat like a sphinx, patient and inscrutable, her gaze occasionally drifting to Marina with an expression that contained multitudes of emotion. Other diners had begun to filter out, but many lingered longer than necessary, sensing that something momentous was unfolding. unwilling to leave before the drama reached its conclusion. The grandeur's usual hushed elegance had given way to an electric anticipation. Even the servers moved differently, whispering to each other in corners, stealing glances at the three focal points of the evening's strange theater: the young server who had accepted an impossible challenge, the billionaire CEO who had actually agreed to honor his wager, and the elderly woman who held the key to secrets that had been buried for more than half a century. Marina's hand shook as she cleared her final table of the evening. She had won, against all odds. Against every expectation, she had completed Richard Blackwood's challenge without a single error. Without one word of English, with perfect Portuguese flowing from her lips for hours, the $1 million was hers. It was enough to transform her life, to save her grandmother, to escape the endless grind of poverty that had defined her existence. But the money seemed almost incidental now, a footnote to the much larger story that was about to unfold. What value did financial security have compared to understanding who she really was, where she really came from, and what had been stolen from her family? She retreated to the staff room and changed out of her uniform, hanging the black vest and white shirt carefully in her locker. She pulled on jeans and a simple sweater, tying her dark hair back in a ponytail rather than the severe bun the restaurant required. Looking at herself in the small, scratched mirror, she barely recognized the woman staring back. This morning she had been Marina Santos, invisible server, struggling granddaughter, a person defined entirely by her circumstances and her limitations. Tonight she was something else, someone with a history that stretched back into a world of wealth and scandal, someone connected to powerful families by blood and betrayal, someone who mattered enough that a billionaire was willing to wait hours just to hear her story. When she emerged from the staff room, Gerald intercepted her immediately. "Marina, I need to know what's going on. Blackwood's lawyer called while you were changing. They're drawing up some kind of contract. There's talk of money changing hands, of non-disclosure agreements. Are you in trouble? Should the restaurant be worried about liability?" Marina looked at her manager with newfound clarity. She had spent 18 months catering to his anxiety, smoothing over his neuroses, making herself small to avoid adding to his stress. But she was done making herself small. "Gerald," she said calmly, "what's happening tonight has nothing to do with the restaurant. It's a family matter, a personal matter. You have nothing to worry about. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have people waiting for me." She walked past him before he could sputter a response, striding into the dining room with her head high. The space had largely emptied now. Only a handful of tables were still occupied, and those guests were making no pretense of eating, openly staring at the unfolding drama. Richard Blackwood stood as she approached, a gesture of respect that surprised her. His companions had been dismissed at some point, sent away with instructions Marina could only imagine. Now it was just Blackwood, Sophia, her caretaker, and Marina herself, four people about to excavate a past that someone had worked very hard to keep buried. "Senora Almeida," Marina said in Portuguese, approaching the old woman's table, "I'm ready to hear your story now." Sophia's eyes filled with tears that she didn't try to hide. She reached out a trembling hand and Marina took it, feeling the papery softness of aged skin, the fragility of bones worn thin by time. "Come sit, child. What I have to tell you will take some time, and none of it will be easy to hear." Richard Blackwood moved his chair over to Sophia's table, creating an unlikely triangle. The caretaker, a woman who had clearly seen everything in her long career, discreetly stepped back to give them privacy, but remained close enough to assist if Sophia needed her. Sophia took a shaky breath, her hands still gripping Marina's. "I need to start at the beginning," she said, her Portuguese carrying the refined accent of São Paulo's upper classes, a dialect that spoke of money and education, and a world that no longer existed. "In 1958, I was 21 years old, the eldest daughter of the Almeida family. We were not the wealthiest family in São Paulo, but we were comfortable, respectable. My father owned textile mills. Your grandmother, Maria Helena, was 19, beautiful, brilliant, studying literature at the university. We were very close, she and I, more than sisters. We were best friends, confidants, each other's whole world." Blackwood leaned forward, his expression intense. "And my grandfather? Where does Antonio Blackwood enter this story?" Sophia's face hardened at the name. "Your grandfather arrived in Brazil in 1959 as a young American businessman looking to expand his family's industrial holdings into South America. He was handsome, charming, sophisticated, everything a young woman from a good family was raised to desire in a husband. He courted me properly, met my family, made all the right promises. By 1961, we were engaged. It was supposed to be the wedding of the sea." Marina felt her grandmother's past crystallizing around her, this hidden world of privilege and promise that Maria Helena had never once mentioned. "What happened?" she asked, though part of her already knew the answer would be painful. Sophia's grip on her hand tightened. "Antonio Blackwood happened. The man I thought I knew was a fiction, a carefully constructed persona designed to gain access to my family's business connections and assets. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that he was also courting your grandmother in secret. He would visit our house to see me, and then he would arrange private meetings with Maria Helena, telling her that he truly loved her but couldn't break his engagement to me without destroying both families. He played us against each other with the skill of a master manipulator." Richard Blackwood's face had gone pale. His jaw worked as if he wanted to interrupt, to defend his grandfather, but he remained silent. "This was a reckoning, and he had promised to hear the truth. Sophia continued, her voice growing stronger despite her physical frailness, as if the act of finally telling this story after 60 years was giving her renewed vitality. Maria Helena and I discovered his duplicity quite by accident. I found a letter he had written to her, passionate, promising, full of declarations that mirrored exactly what he had said to me. We confronted him together, the two Almeida sisters standing united against the man who had betrayed us both. And that's when he showed his true nature. He didn't apologize. He didn't beg forgiveness. Instead, he threatened us. He had been using his engagement to me as cover while systematically buying up my father's business debts, acquiring leverage over our family's finance. He told us that if I broke the engagement publicly, if either of us spoke about what he had done, he would destroy our family financially. He would call in every debt, tank every business contract, ruin our reputation so thoroughly that the Almeida name would become synonymous with scandal and bankruptcy. Marina felt sick. This was the man whose grandson sat across from her now, the foundation upon which the Blackwood fortune was built. But you did break the engagement, she said. The records show that the wedding never happened. Sophia nodded, a grim smile crossing her aged features. Because Maria Helena found something. Your grandmother was always the brave one, the rebellious one, the one willing to take risks. While I was paralyzed by fear and indecision, she decided to investigate Antonio Black. She followed him, bribed his servants for information, went through his papers when she got the chance. And she discovered that his entire business enterprise in Brazil was built on fraud. He was operating what you would now call a Ponzi scheme, using investments from new partners to pay returns to earlier investors, all while siphoning money into American accounts. She found documents, contracts, ledgers. She stole them, copied them, and threatened to take them to the authorities if he didn't release our family from his control and leave Brazil immediately. It was blackmail, pure and simple, but it was the only weapon we had against a man who had already demonstrated he would stop at nothing to get what he wanted. Blackwood's voice was rough when he finally spoke. My grandfather left Brazil in 1963. Family history says he completed his business there and decided American opportunities were more promising. Sophia's laugh was bitter. That's a polite way of describing fleeing before criminal charges could be filed. Antonio left, yes, but not quietly and not without revenge. Before he went, he used his remaining influence to plant stories about the Almeida family, suggesting that we were the ones involved in financial improprieties, that the broken engagement was because my family had tried to trap him with false debts. Our reputation was destroyed. My father's business collapsed. Maria Helena, who had been the one to actually expose Antonio, was particularly targeted. Rumors spread that she had been Antonio's mistress, that she had stolen from him, that she was unstable and dangerous. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. Marina understood now why her grandmother had disappeared from society, why she had changed her name, why she had never spoken of her past. She had been branded, slandered, turned into a cautionary tale by a powerful man's revenge. And your separation? Marina asked. Why didn't you and my grandmother stay together? For the first time, Sophia's composure truly broke. Tears spilled down her cheeks and her voice cracked with a grief that 60 years hadn't diminished. Because I was weak, because I was scared, because I chose survival over loyalty. She looked at Marina with eyes full of ancient shame. An American businessman, a good man who had no connection to the scandal, offered to marry me and take me away from Brazil. It was an escape, a chance to start over. I begged Maria Helena to come with me, but she refused. She said someone had to stay to help salvage our father's reputation, to rebuild what had been torn down. She told me to go, to save myself. And I did. God forgive me, I left my little sister alone in the wreckage, and I never saw her again. The silence that followed Sophia's confession was dense and suffocating, heavy with the weight of regrets that could never be undone and choices that had rippled across decades. Marina felt something shift inside her chest, a complex tangle of emotions she couldn't immediately name. This woman sitting before her, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks, had abandoned her grandmother in the worst moment of her life, had chosen safety over solidarity, survival over sisterhood. But Marina also understood, with the wisdom that comes from living on the edge of financial disaster, that she couldn't judge decisions made in desperation by people she had never met in circumstances she had never faced. Richard Blackwood had gone very still, his face carved from stone, his eyes distant as if he were recalculating everything he thought he knew about his family, his legacy, his very identity. Finally he spoke, his voice hoarse and strained. My grandfather built an empire. He was celebrated in business journals, honored by universities, philanthropic organizations. Streets are named after him. Buildings bear the Blackwood name. And you're telling me it was all founded on fraud and extortion? That the man my father spoke of with such reverence was a criminal who destroyed innocent families for profit? Sophia met his gaze without flinching. I'm telling you exactly that. Your grandfather was brilliant. I'll grant him that. Brilliant and utterly without conscience. He understood that if you steal small, you go to jail, but if you steal big enough and dress it up in respectability, you become a captain of industry. By the time he returned to America, he had enough capital from his Brazilian operations to legitimize himself. He invested in legitimate businesses, built real assets, created an empire that looked clean because its foundation was buried under layers of corporate structures and international transactions that no one bothered to investigate. Marina found her voice, though it came out smaller than she intended. "My grandmother. What happened to her after you left?" Sophia's expression crumpled with fresh pain. "I don't know all of it. We lost contact. By the time I tried to find her years later, she had vanished completely, changed her name, left Brazil, disappeared into a new life. I searched for her for decades, hired investigators, followed every lead. But Maria Helena didn't want to be found, and she was clever enough to stay hidden. I thought..." Her voice broke. "I thought she had died. I thought I had lost her forever, that I would go to my grave without ever being able to tell her how sorry I was, how every day without her was a punishment I richly deserved. And then tonight," Marina said slowly, understanding dawning, "you heard my voice." Sophia nodded, reaching out to touch Marina's cheek with a trembling hand. "I heard my sister speaking through you. The same cadence, the same musicality, even the way you shape certain words. It's genetic, I think, the patterns of speech, the rhythm of language, or perhaps Maria Helena taught you so well that she embedded herself in your voice. Either way, I heard her and I knew. I knew she had survived, that she had built a life, that she had somehow found love and family despite everything Antonio Blackwood had taken from her. Your grandmother," Richard Blackwood said quietly, his gaze fixed on Marina with new intensity. "Was she happy in the life she built after leaving Brazil?" Marina considered the question, thinking of the woman who had raised her in cramped apartments and second-hand clothes, who had sung her Portuguese lullabies while they ate rice and beans for dinner 5 nights a week, who had worked her fingers raw at a sewing machine to ensure Marina had school supplies and decent shoes. Was she happy? She never complained, Marina said finally. She never spoke of regrets or of a past that was taken from her. She focused on the present, on raising me, on building something good and true from whatever pieces she had left. If she carried bitterness, I never saw it. If she mourned the life she lost, she never let it poison the life she created. So yes, I think in her own way, despite everything, she found happiness, she found purpose, she found me. Tears were streaming down Marina's own face now, and she didn't try to stop them. She survived, and she made sure I would survive too, and that's more than Antonio Blackwood left her with. Richard Blackwood stood abruptly, pacing away from the table before turning back, his movements sharp with agitation. He ran his hands through his hair, destroying its careful styling, looking for the first time like a man rather than a monument to success and control. This changes everything, he said. Don't you understand? My entire life, my entire identity is built on a lie. Every dollar I've earned, every deal I've made, it all traces back to capital that was stolen, to a fortune built on destroyed families and broken lives. I'm the heir to a criminal enterprise dressed up in expensive suits and charitable foundations. Sophia's voice cut through his crisis with surprising sharpness. What you do with that knowledge is what matters now. Yes, your grandfather was a monster. Yes, your family wealth has a poisoned root, but you are not Antonio Black. You have a choice he never made. You can acknowledge the truth. You can make amends. You can break the cycle of harm that he started. Marina watched the two of them, the elderly woman who had been both victim and survivor, and the powerful man discovering that his foundation was built on sand. She realized that this moment, this conversation, was bigger than any of them individually. It was about generational trauma, about how sins of the fathers echo down through time, about whether the inheritors of stolen wealth had an obligation to make things right. But there was something else niggling at the back of her mind, a piece of the puzzle that didn't quite fit. She thought about her grandmother's silence, about the absolute completeness of her erasure of her past life. It seemed extreme, even accounting for the trauma and scandal. Maria Helena had possessed evidence of Antonio Blackwood's crimes, evidence powerful enough to force him to flee Brazil. What had happened to that evidence? Why hadn't she used it to clear the Almeida name, to restore her family's reputation? Sophia, Marina said carefully, interrupting Blackwood's pacing. You said my grandmother found documents, evidence of the fraud. What happened to them? Did she turn them over to authorities? Sophia's expression shifted, becoming guarded. That's complicated. She threatened to expose them, yes, but actually doing so would have been dangerous. Antonio Blackwood had connections, power, resources. Going public might have destroyed him, but it would have destroyed Maria Helena in the process. He would have ensured it. She made him leave Brazil, made him release our family from his financial control, but she kept the evidence as insurance, as protection against his revenge. So she had leverage, Marina said, thinking it through. She had proof that could destroy one of America's most powerful businessmen. That's not just protection, that's power. Why live in poverty? Why struggle? Why not use what she had to secure a better life? The question hung in the air, and Marina saw understanding dawn on Richard Blackwood's face at the same moment it crystallized in her own mind. Unless, Blackwood said slowly, she did use it. Unless there was contact between our families after my grandfather left. Unless some kind of arrangement was made. Sophia's silence was answer enough. Marina felt a cold certainty spreading through her chest. Tell me, she demanded. Tell me what my grandmother did. Sophia closed her eyes, her aged face collapsing into lines of sorrow and resignation. Maria Helena contacted Antonio Blackwood in 1968, 5 years after he fled Brazil. I only know this because she wrote to me once, a single letter that found me through channels I still don't understand. She didn't tell me much, just that she had secured her future, that I shouldn't worry, and that she forgave me for leaving her. She said she had made a deal with the devil, and the price was her past, but the reward was survival. A deal with the devil. Marina's mind raced. What kind of deal? Money? A payoff to keep the evidence buried? Is that how she survived, how she came to America? But even as she asked the question, she knew there had to be more to it. Her grandmother had lived modestly, worked hard, never displayed any sign of hidden wealth or regular payments. If Antonio Blackwood had bought her silence, he had done it cheaply, or she had spent it all, or there was some other arrangement entirely. Richard Blackwood pulled out his phone, his fingers moving rapidly across the screen. "Give me your grandmother's full name as it was in Brazil." "Marina Almeida," Sophia supplied. "Maria Helena Almeida, born January 5th, 1940. Blackwood typed, waited, his face illuminated by the cold glow of his screen. Then he went very still, and the color drained from his face. "Oh my God," he whispered. "Oh my God." He turned the phone so they could both see. On the screen was a scanned document, old and formal, the kind of thing that required multiple levels of access to the Blackwood Industries private archives to uncover. It was a trust document dated December 1968, establishing a fund in the name of Maria Helena Santos, formerly Almeida. The trustee was Antonio Blackwood. The beneficiary was Maria Helena and her descendants in perpetuity. But the amount was what stole Marina's breath. It wasn't millions. It was a modest fund, enough to provide a basic income, enough to ensure survival but not comfort, enough to keep someone quiet without making them wealthy enough to become independent or powerful enough to be a threat. Antonio Blackwood had bought her grandmother's silence with just enough money to survive, trapping her in a gilded cage of dependency that lasted until his death in 2003. After that, the trust had been administered by his estate lawyer, probably without anyone in the current Blackwood family even knowing it existed. An automatic payment buried in the complex machinery of generational wealth. Marina felt the world rearrange itself around this revelation. Her grandmother hadn't been heroic and independent, scraping by on hard work and determination. She had been paid off, accepting money from the man who had destroyed her family, living on the charity of her enemy for decades. The bitter irony was suffocating. All those years, all that struggle, and there had been money coming in, just never enough to escape, never enough to be free, just enough to survive. It was perhaps the cruelest form of revenge Antonio Blackwood could have devised. He didn't destroy Maria Helena. He kept her alive but broken, dependent but powerless, forever trapped in the identity of victim. Marina couldn't breathe. The revelation hit her like a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs and making the elegant dining room spin around her. Everything she had believed about her grandmother, every story she had told herself about their noble poverty, about the dignity of their struggle, about building something meaningful from nothing, all of it was a lie. Or not a lie exactly, but a story with crucial information omitted, context deliberately erased. Her grandmother had been taking money from Antonio Blackwood for decades, accepting payment to keep silent about crimes that could have brought down one of America's most powerful families. It was survival, yes, but it was also complicity. It was surrender dressed up as pragmatism. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. "I need air. I need to think. This is too much." Richard Blackwood was immediately on his feet, his hand outstretched as if to steady her, though he didn't touch her. "Miss Santos, Marina, I understand this is overwhelming, but we need to talk about what this means. About what happens next." Marina whirled on him, months of exhaustion and years of struggle suddenly finding a target. "What it means? What it means is that my entire life has been a performance. My grandmother raised me on pride and Portuguese lullabies, teaching me to hold my head high despite our poverty, to find dignity in hard work, to never accept charity or pity from anyone. And all the while, we were living on blood money, on hush payments from the man who destroyed her family. Do you have any idea what that does to a person? To discover that everything you believed about your life was built on a foundation of shame and compromise?" Her voice had risen, echoing in the nearly empty restaurant. Gerald, the manager, was hovering near the kitchen door, clearly torn between intervening and preserving his own employment. The remaining diners had given up any pretense of not watching, openly staring at the confrontation unfolding before them. Marina didn't care. Let them watch. Let them see what happened when carefully constructed facades crumbled, when the mythology families built around themselves collided with ugly, inconvenient truth. Sophia's voice, frail but firm, cut through Marina's anger. "Child, your grandmother was not weak. She was realistic. What you call surrender, I call survival. She had no family support, no resources, no allies. She was a young woman alone in a world that had branded her a criminal and a whore. Antonio Blackwood offered her a choice. Take enough money to survive and disappear, or refuse and be destroyed utterly. She chose to live. She chose to have the possibility of a future, of children, of grandchildren. She chose you, Marina." The words hit harder than any accusation could have. Marina sank back into her chair, her anger deflating into something more complex, more painful. She thought about her grandmother, barely 20 years old, her reputation shredded, her family's fortune destroyed, facing down a monster who had already demonstrated he would stop at nothing to protect himself. What would Marina herself have done in that situation? She wanted to believe she would have been braver, more principled, that she would have taken the evidence to the authorities and damned the consequences. But sitting here tonight, knowing she had accepted $1 million challenge from Richard Blackwood for the exact same reason her grandmother had accepted, Antonio's trust, to survive, to pay for medical care, to secure a future she couldn't otherwise afford. How could she judge Maria Helena for making the same impossible calculation? Richard Blackwood had returned to his seat, his expression troubled and introspective. He pulled up more information on his phone, scrolling through documents that his wealth and position gave him access to, records that would be sealed to ordinary people. The trust, he said quietly, was structured to end upon the beneficiary's death. When your grandmother dies, Marina, the remaining funds revert to the Blackwood estate. There's about $300,000 left in it. It's been paying out a modest monthly stipend for over 50 years. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that was almost uncomfortable. My grandfather designed it to last, to keep her dependent for her entire life. Its sophisticated cruelty masquerading as generosity. $300,000. It was more money than Marina had ever imagined having access to, and yet in the context of the Blackwood fortune, it was pocket change, a rounding error in a quarterly budget. Her grandmother had been bought so cheaply, her silence worth less than what Richard Blackwood probably spent on his suits in a year. The disparity was obscene, the power imbalance so absolute that it made Marina feel sick. But there was something else bothering her, another piece that didn't fit. If the trust was meant to ensure her grandmother's permanent dependence and silence, why was Maria Helena in a care facility that Marina could barely afford? Why had she been living in poverty, working menial jobs, if there was money coming in every month? She voiced the question aloud, and Sophia's expression shifted, becoming troubled. What do you mean, child? Your grandmother was receiving the trust payments. They've been going to an account in her name for decades. Marina shook her head. That's impossible. We lived on nothing. She worked as a seamstress, cleaned houses, took in laundry. When I got old enough, I worked too, contributing to rent and food. There was never extra money, never a cushion for emergencies. When she had her stroke, we had no savings to fall back on. I had to take this job at the Grandeur to cover her care facility costs because there was nothing. No mysterious account. No trust fund payment, nothing. Richard Blackwood's fingers flew across his phone, accessing banking records that should have been private but weren't, apparently, to someone with his resources. He went very still, his face darkening. The payments have been going out every month like clockwork, deposited into an account at First National Bank under the name Maria Helena Santos. He looked up, and Marina saw something in his expression that frightened her, but the account has been emptied regularly. Every deposit is followed within days by a withdrawal. The money hasn't been accumulating. It's been going somewhere else. The implications crashed over Marina like a wave. Someone had been stealing from her grandmother. For years, possibly decades, someone had been siphoning off the trust payments, leaving Maria Helena to struggle in poverty while they benefited from money that was meant to ensure her survival. The betrayal was so profound, so calculated, that Marina couldn't immediately process it. Who had access to her grandmother's bank account? Who knew about the trust? Who had been quietly robbing an elderly woman of her already meager security? Sophia's hand gripped the table, her knuckles white. Find out where the money went, she commanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had once been Snow Paulo society royalty. Find out who did this to my sister. Blackwood was already pulling up more records, his expression growing darker with each screen. The withdrawals, he said slowly, were made in person at various branch locations. The withdrawal slips are signed by, he paused, his face going pale, by Maria Helena Santos herself. Marina felt the floor drop out from under her. No, she said flatly. That's not possible. My grandmother would never have hidden money from me. We were a team. We told each other everything. She wouldn't have taken the payments and spent them on God knows what while I worked myself to exhaustion trying to keep us afloat. It doesn't make sense. But even as she said it, Marina remembered things. Small things that hadn't seemed significant at the time. The days when her grandmother would disappear for hours, claiming she was visiting friends Marina never met. The occasional new item, a nice scarf or a book that appeared without explanation. The way Maria Helena would sometimes become vague and distant when Marina asked about finances, changing the subject with practiced ease. Marina had attributed it to her grandmother's age, to the natural forgetfulness of the elderly. But what if it had been something else? What if Maria Helena had been deliberately concealing the money, spending it on something she didn't want Marina to know about? Blackwood continued scrolling, pulling up transaction details, building a pattern. The withdrawals are consistent, about $2,000 per month, every month for the last 20 years that I can see. They're always made in cash. There's no trail after the money leaves the bank. It could be going anywhere, for anything. He looked at Marina, and his expression was sympathetic. I know this is painful, but we need to consider the possibility that your grandmother was using the money for something she wanted to keep private. Gambling debts maybe, or supporting someone else, or he hesitated, or simply keeping a nest egg that she didn't want to share. Marina wanted to scream, to throw something, to reject the entire conversation, but she was tired of denial, tired of discovering that everything she believed was built on carefully curated lies. If her grandmother had been taking the money and hiding it, there had to be a reason. Maria Helena wasn't frivolous or selfish. She had raised Marina with love and sacrifice, even if that sacrifice was more complicated than Marina had understood. There had to be an What if, Sophia said softly, her voice trembling, she was sending the money back to Brazil? Marina stared at her great-aunt. What do you mean? Sophia's eyes were distant, looking at something only she could see. Our father, your great-grandfather, he lost everything because of Antonio Blackwood. He died in poverty and disgrace. But there were others. People who had invested with our family, employees who lost their livelihoods when the business collapsed. What if Maria Helena spent the last decades trying to make amends, sending the money to people who had been collateral damage in Antonio's scheme? It would be exactly like her. She always felt responsible for everything, for everyone. The theory settled over them like snow, quiet and heavy. It made a terrible kind of sense. Maria Helena, trapped in a devil's bargain, accepting money from the man who had destroyed her family, but refusing to benefit from it personally. Instead, sending it back to Brazil, trying to repair some small fraction of the damage Antonio Blackwood had done, living in poverty by choice rather than keep what she considered blood money. It was noble and heartbreaking and so impossibly stubborn that Marina recognized her grandmother in every element of it. She would have done that, Marina whispered. She would have seen it as penance, as the only way to accept the money without losing herself completely. Richard Blackwood set his phone down, leaning back in his chair. He looked older suddenly, the weight of generational sins settling visibly on his shoulders. So my grandfather bought your grandmother's silence, and she turned around and used his money to undo his damage. He paused, searching for words. That's a level of moral complexity I'm not sure I can fully process. Marina looked at him, this man who represented everything she had been raised to distrust. Wealth and power and casual cruelty. But tonight he had honored his word, paid her the $1 million he had promised, and joined her in excavating truths that threatened his family's carefully cultivated legacy. He wasn't his grandfather any more than she was her grandmother. They were both inheritors of choices they hadn't made, trying to navigate the consequences of decisions that had been set in motion before they were born. We need to talk to her, Marina said. We need to ask my grandmother directly what she did with the money and why. She deserves the chance to tell her own story, not have us construct it from banking records and assumptions. Sophia nodded emphatically. Yes, I need to see my sister. I need to tell her I'm sorry, that I never stopped searching for her, that I never stopped loving her. Marina looked at Richard Blackwood. Will you come with us to see her? He didn't hesitate. Yes. Whatever she did with my grandfather's money, she earned it 1,000 times over. And I need to understand. I need to hear from someone who actually knew Antonio Blackwood, who faced his cruelty directly. What kind of man founded my empire? Maybe then I can figure out what the hell I'm supposed to do with that knowledge. The drive to the care facility happened in Richard Blackwood's car. A sleek black vehicle that probably cost more than Marina had earned in her entire life. Sophia sat in the back with her caretaker, clutching Marina's hand with a grip that belied her physical frailty. The old woman had been silent since leaving the restaurant, her face a mask of concentration, as if she were rehearsing what she would say when she finally saw her sister again after 60 years of separation. Marina understood. What words could possibly bridge that chasm of time and regret? What apology could be adequate for a lifetime of absence? Richard drove with the focused intensity he probably brought to every task, navigating the late-night streets with precision. He had removed his suit jacket, rolled up his sleeves, and in the dim light of the car's interior, he looked less like a billionaire CEO and more like what he actually was, a man in his 40s trying to make sense of a legacy he had never questioned until tonight. Marina watched the city slide past her window, familiar streets transformed by the strange circumstances of the evening into something new and unsettling. She had walked these sidewalks 1,000 times, invisible in her poverty, just another struggling person in a city full of them. But tonight she carried $1 million promise in her pocket, metaphorically at least, and the weight of family secrets that rewrote her entire understanding of herself. The care facility was a modest building in a neighborhood that developers had forgotten, the kind of place where the elderly went when their families couldn't afford the nice retirement community gardens and activities. And dignified names. Sunset Manor it was called, though there was nothing majestic about the squat concrete structure with its flickering sign and small barred windows. Marina had visited every day for 6 months, watching her grandmother slowly recover from the stroke that had stolen her mobility and clouded her mind. The staff knew her, nodded as she entered with her unlikely companions, too tired from their night shifts to question why she was arriving at nearly midnight with a billionaire and an elderly woman in an expensive dress. Maria Helena Santos was in room 214, a small space she shared with another patient whose snoring provided a constant soundtrack to the clinical beeps and hums of medical equipment. Marina had tried to get her a private room, but the cost was impossible. Another reminder of how close to the edge they had always lived, despite the secret trust fund that someone, possibly her grandmother herself, had been systematically draining. She led the small group down the hallway, its floors polished but worn, its walls decorated with cheerful posters that couldn't quite mask the underlying sadness of the place. This was where people came when they had run out of options, when their bodies had betrayed them and their resources were exhausted. Marina paused outside the door, her hand on the handle. "She's not always lucid," she said quietly, looking at Sophia. The stroke affected her memory, her speech. Sometimes she's sharp and present, sometimes she's lost in the past or confused about where she is. "I don't know what we're gonna find tonight." Sophia's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I don't care what state she's in, I just need to see her. I need her to know I never stopped looking, that I never stopped loving her." Richard Blackwood stood slightly apart, and Marina noticed he had his phone in his hand, not to record, but as a kind of security blanket, something familiar to hold on to in this deeply unfamiliar situation. Marina opened the door. The room was dim, lit only by the glow of monitors and the weak light filtering in from the hallway. Maria Helena lay in the bed nearest the window, her small form barely making an impression under the thin blanket. Her white hair, once lustrous black like Marina's, spread across the pillow like a corona. Her face, deeply lined and sunken with age and illness, was turned toward the darkened window. For a moment Marina thought she was asleep, but then Maria Helena spoke, her voice raspy but clear, speaking in Portuguese. "Marina, minha neta, my granddaughter, you're late tonight. I was worried." Marina crossed to the bed, taking her grandmother's hand. "I'm sorry, Bobo, I had to work late, but I brought visitors, people who want very much to see you." Maria Helena's eyes, clouded with cataracts but still dark and expressive, focused on Marina's face. "Visitors? At this hour? Who would visit an old woman in the middle of the night?" She said it with a touch of humor, the sharp wit that no stroke could fully extinguish. Marina stepped aside, and Sophia moved into her grandmother's line of sight, leaning heavily on her cane, tears streaming freely down her weathered cheeks. For a long moment Maria Helena simply stared, her expression unreadable. Then her hand, the one not holding Marina's, reached out trembling toward her sister. "Sophia?" she whispered, using the Portuguese pronunciation of her sister's name. "Sophia, is that you? Or am I dreaming again?" Sophia sank into the chair beside the bed, her caretaker helping to steady her. "Not a dream, Helena, not a dream. I'm here. I found you. After all these years, I've finally found you." Maria Helena's face crumpled, and a sound emerged from her throat that was part sob, part laugh, part release of decades of held emotion. "You found me," she repeated. "Or I found you. Does it matter? You're here." The two sisters reached for each other, their aged hands clasping with desperate strength, and Marina watched as 60 years of separation collapsed into a single moment of connection. Sophia was speaking rapidly in Portuguese, words tumbling over each other. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I should never have left you. I was a coward. I chose safety over you. Please forgive me, please." Maria Helena shook her head, tears running into the lines of her face. "There's nothing to forgive. You survived. You built a life. That's what I wanted for you. That's what I told you to do. Did you think I blamed you? Sophia, my sister, my heart, I only ever wanted you to be safe and happy." Richard Blackwood stood near the door, and Marina saw that his own eyes were wet. This was not his world. These raw emotions and simple room and reunion of two elderly women who had been shaped by his grandfather's cruelty, but he was witnessing it with what appeared to be genuine emotion. His carefully constructed armor of wealth and power, inadequate protection against the fundamental human truth of what was unfolding before him. Marina moved to stand beside him, and they shared a look of understanding. Whatever else happened tonight, whatever revelations still waited, this moment between the sisters was sacred, inviolable, worth every difficult second that had led to it. Eventually, the initial storm of emotion subsided into something quieter, more sustainable. Maria Helena noticed Richard for the first time, her eyes narrowing with sudden focus. "And who is this young man? Why does he look familiar?" Marina took a breath. "Vovo. This is Richard Blackwood. He's the grandson of Antonio Blackwood." The effect on Maria Helena was immediate and profound. Her entire body went rigid, her hands squeezing Sophia's with sudden painful strength. Her face, which had been soft with joy, hardened into something ancient and terrible. "Blackwood," she said, the name emerging like a curse. "Another Blackwood in my room. After all these years, they still find me." "No, grandmother," Marina said quickly, moving back to the bedside. "It's not like that. He came to help. He wants to understand what his grandfather did. He wants to make things right." Maria Helena's laugh was bitter and sharp. "Make things right? Child, you can't make right what was destroyed so thoroughly. Antonio Blackwood didn't just steal money or ruin businesses. He stole futures, possibilities, the people we might have become. How do you compensate for that? How do you restore decades of stolen time?" She looked at Richard with an intensity that made him visibly uncomfortable. "You have his eyes, cold blue eyes that look at people and see only assets or obstacles. Does your money keep you warm at night, Singer Blackwood? Does it fill the empty spaces in your soul?" Richard stepped forward, and to his credit, he didn't flinch from her judgment. "Mrs. Santos," he said in careful Portuguese, "I can't undo what my grandfather did. I can't give you back the years he took or restore the life he destroyed, but I can acknowledge the truth. I can stop pretending my family's fortune was earned through legitimate means, and I can try, inadequately I'm sure, to provide some measure of justice. even if it's 60 years too late. Maria Helena studied him for a long moment. Then she surprised them all by gesturing to a chair. Sit, she commanded. If we're going to talk about Antonio Blackwood, if we're going to excavate that particular grave, then we're all going to need to be sitting down. As Richard pulled a chair close to the bed, Maria Helena looked at Marina, her expression becoming gentle again. Minhanetta, my clever granddaughter, you've done what I could never do. You've brought all the pieces together. Your voice tonight, speaking Portuguese in some restaurant where a Blackwood could hear. It was like I was calling out to Sophia through you, and she heard me. Destiny or chance, I don't know which, but it happened. Now we finished what I should have finished 60 years ago. Marina felt a chill. What do you mean, finish it? Maria Helena's smile was grim. I mean, we tell the whole truth, not the partial truth I've been living with, not the comfortable lies both our families have constructed. The real truth, the one I buried to protect you, Marina. To protect everyone. But I'm dying, child. The doctors don't say it, but I know. And I won't take these secrets to my grave. Maria Helena shifted in her hospital bed, struggling to sit up more fully. Marina moved to help her, adjusting pillows and raising the bed's angle until her grandmother was nearly upright, her face now visible to everyone in the room. The old woman looked at each of them in turn, her gaze lingering longest on Richard Blackwood as if measuring him, determining whether he had the capacity to bear what she was about to reveal. Finally she spoke, her Portuguese carrying the weight of decades of silence. The money from the trust, she began, her voice stronger now, animated by purpose. I never spent a dollar of it on myself, not one. Every month for over 50 years I went to the bank, withdrew the payment Antonio Blackwood's lawyers sent, and I used it for something he never intended, something that would have enraged him if he'd known. Sophia leaned forward, still holding her sister's hand. What did you do with it, Helena? We thought perhaps you sent it back to Brazil, to people our father had harmed. Maria Helena shook her head, a small sad smile crossing her lips. No, Sophia, nothing so noble. I used it to raise a child who had no one else, a child whose very existence was Antonio Blackwood's darkest secret. The room went silent except for the soft beeping of monitors. Marina felt her world shifting again, another revelation reshaping everything she thought she understood. Vovo, what are you saying? Whose child? Maria Helena's eyes found Marina's, and in them was a sorrow so deep it seemed bottomless. Your mother's child, Minhanetta, you, but not just you. Not at first. She took a shaky breath, the effort of revelation clearly taxing her weakened body. In 1963, after Antonio fled Brazil, I discovered I was pregnant, his child, the result of one of his secret meetings with me before I knew he was playing both Sophia and me for fools, before I understood what kind of monster he truly was. Sophia gasped, her free hand flying to her mouth. Helena, you've never told me. You've never said anything in your letter. I didn't tell anyone, Maria. Helena said, her voice hardening. How could I? I was already branded as his mistress, already destroyed in society's eyes. A child, his child, would have been the final proof of my supposed moral corruption. More than that, she looked directly at Richard now. I was terrified of what Antonio would do if he discovered he had a child by me. Would he try to take the baby? Would he have us both killed to eliminate the evidence of his crimes and his betrayal of your grandmother, Senor Blackwood? Richard had gone pale, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. You're saying my grandfather had a child with you? That your daughter was his daughter? That, Marina, is, he couldn't finish the sentence. Maria Helena finished it for him. Marina's Antonio Blackwood's great-granddaughter. Yes. His blood runs in her veins just as surely as mine does. Your grandfather and I share a descendant, which makes you and Marina. She paused, letting the mathematics of bloodlines settle over them. Distant cousins of a sort, connected by the very crime that tore our families apart. Marina couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't process what she was hearing. Antonio Blackwood was her great-grandfather. The monster who had destroyed her family was also her family. The revulsion was immediate and visceral, but underneath it was something more complicated. A strange sense of pieces falling into place. Her grandmother's absolute silence about the past suddenly made perfect sense. This wasn't just shame or trauma. This was protection, keeping Marina ignorant of her own bloodline so she could never be claimed by the Blackwoods, never be used as leverage or discarded as an inconvenience. So the trust, Sophia said slowly, working through the implications. Antonio established it not as hush money for a business rival, but as secret child support. He knew about your daughter. Maria Helena nodded. He knew. I wrote to him in 1968 when my daughter was 5 years old, after years of desperate poverty. After exhausting every other option, I told him he had a child, that she was hungry, and we had nowhere to go. I sent him the evidence I'd kept, the documents proving his fraud, and I said I would take them to the authorities and expose him as not just a criminal, but as a man who abandoned his own daughter unless he provided for her care. It was blackmail, Richard said, and there was no judgment in his voice, only a kind of horrified understanding. You used his crime and his illegitimate child as leverage. Maria Helena met his gaze without flinching. I used the only weapons I had, and he responded by setting up the trust, just enough to keep us alive, but not enough for us to thrive, not enough for independence or dignity. It was brilliant in its cruelty, really. He made me complicit in his crime by accepting his money, ensured I could never expose him without exposing my daughter's parentage, and kept us perpetually dependent. I became his creature, bound to his will even after his death. But why stay poor? Marina found her voice finally, though it came out raw and strained. Why not use the money? Why struggle if there was enough coming in to live comfortably? Maria Helena turned to her granddaughter, and Marina saw infinite love in those clouded eyes. Because your mother needed to never know where she came from. If we had lived well, if we had had money without visible source of income, questions would have been asked. She would have wanted to know about her father. So I lived as if the money didn't exist. I worked to provide for us through legitimate means. And the trust payments, she paused, I saved them. Every single payment for 30 years I put into a separate account your mother never knew about. When your mother died giving birth to you, when I suddenly had an infant to raise, I was already 63 years old. I took the accumulated money, over $500,000 by then, and I used it for something Antonio Blackwood would have despised. I established a scholarship fund for young women in Brazil, daughters of families his schemes had destroyed. Every month, the new trust payments went directly to fund education, to provide opportunities, to help heal some small fraction of the damage he'd done. The account you found, Senior Blackwood, showing withdrawals in my name, that was my lawyer, authorized to move the money from the trust to the scholarship fund. Every penny Antonio Blackwood sent to silence me went instead to give voice to the voiceless. The revelation hung in the air like incense, sacred and bitter. Marina felt tears streaming down her face, understanding finally the impossible position her grandmother had been in, the moral tightrope she had walked for decades. She had taken blood money and transmuted it into something pure, accepting her role as Antonio Blackwood's victim and his child's mother, but refusing to be defined by either. She had been complicit and resistant, powerless and powerful, broken and unbreakable all at once. It was a level of moral complexity that made Marina's head spin and her heart ache with a love so fierce it was almost painful. Richard Blackwood stood abruptly and walked to the window, his back to them, his shoulders rigid with tension. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. My grandfather raped you. Let's call it what it was. Whatever he told himself about secret meetings and forbidden love, he was a man with power, and you were a young woman he'd already victimized. He destroyed your family, ruined your reputation, got you pregnant, and then held you hostage with child support disguised as generosity. And when he died, no one in my family bothered to question why the estate was making monthly payments to a woman named Maria Helena Santos. We just kept the machine running, kept paying you off without ever asking why. Maria Helena's voice was gentle when she responded, I don't need your guilt, Senior Blackwood. You are not responsible for your grandfather's choices any more than Marina is responsible for carrying his blood. The question is not what he did or what I endured. The question is what you do now. What we all do now, with the truth exposed and the secrets finally spoken aloud. Richard turned back to face them, and Marina saw that his face was wet with tears. He made no move to hide them. I want to honor your scholarship fund, he said. I want to expand it, fully fund it, ensure it continues in perpetuity with enough resources to help thousands of young women rather than just. I want the Blackwood Foundation to formally apologize for Antonio Blackwood's crimes and establish a truth and reconciliation process for any families that were damaged by his business practices. And I want, he looked at Marina, I want to establish you as a full heir to the Blackwood estate if you'll accept it. Not as charity, but as your birthright. You are Antonio's great-granddaughter. You have as much claim to the family wealth as I do. Marina felt dizzy. The $1 million challenge from hours ago now seemed quaint. A tiny sum compared to what Richard was offering. An heir to the Blackwood fortune? Her, a server from a broken family, suddenly elevated to the same status as one of the city's most powerful dynasties? It was absurd, impossible, and yet it made a terrible kind of sense. If she accepted, she would have resources beyond imagination, the ability to help not just her grandmother but thousands of others. But she would also be claiming Antonio Blackwood as her ancestor, acknowledging that his blood ran in her vein, that she was part of his legacy whether she wanted to be or not. Before she could respond, Sophia spoke, her voice carrying unexpected strength. There's something else you all need to know, something Helena and I should have told you from the beginning. Both sisters, the elderly women who had been separated by time and circumstance, shared a look. Then Sophia continued, Marina, you're Portuguese. The reason I recognized your voice, it's not just because you speak like your grandmother, it's because you speak with the Almeida family's cadence, a specific melodic pattern that was unique to our bloodline, passed down through generations. When you accepted Senior Blackwood's challenge tonight, when you spoke our language with such pride and skill, you were doing more than winning a wager. You were reclaiming your heritage, both sides of it, the Almeida dignity and the Blackwood power. You were announcing to the world that you exist, that you matter, that no amount of money or secrets or carefully buried truth could erase you. Maria Helena squeezed Marina's hand with surprising strength. That's why I taught you Portuguese, Minha Neta. Not just because it was the language of my youth, but because it was your inheritance. The one thing Antonio Blackwood couldn't steal or corrupt. In our language, in our words and rhythms and songs, you carry forward something pure. And tonight, by speaking it so beautifully in front of his grandson, you defeated him in a way I never could. You proved that his victims' descendants could rise, could be strong, could claim their place in a world he tried to shape entirely for his own benefit. The hospital room fell into a profound silence as the weight of Maria Helena's words settled over them. Marina looked down at her hands, these ordinary hands that had served thousands of meals, that carried the genetic code of both victim and victimizer, that represented the complicated intersection of two families' tangled histories. She thought about her grandmother's choice to teach her Portuguese with such dedication, spending hours on pronunciation and grammar when they could barely afford food. It had seemed like sentiment, nostalgia for a homeland Maria Helena rarely discussed. But now Marina understood it was strategic, intentional, an act of resistance disguised as tradition. Every lullaby, every conversation, every insistence that Marina speak properly and beautifully had been preparation for a moment like this, when her voice could claim space in a world that had tried to erase her grandmother's entire existence. She looked at Richard Black, this man who hours ago had been a stranger using his wealth to humiliate her for sport, and saw someone fundamentally changed by truth. He stood before her now not as a titan of industry, but as a fellow inheritor of impossible legacies. Someone trying to figure out how to carry forward when the foundation beneath you turns out to be built on suffering. They were connected now not just by distant blood, but by the shared burden of knowing, of being unable to retreat into comfortable ignorance. Marina took a deep breath and spoke, her words coming in Portuguese first as felt appropriate. I accept your offer, Primo Richard, cousin Richard, but with conditions. Richard's eyebrows rose. More negotiations? Even now? Marina smiled. A real smile that carried both sorrow and strength, especially now. I'll join the Blackwood family formally, acknowledge the bloodline, take my place as an heir. But the money that comes with that position, my share, it doesn't go to me personally. It goes to expanding the scholarship fund my grandmother created. I want to build schools in Brazil in Maria Helena Almeida's name. I want to fund programs that teach young girls not just academics, but pride in their heritage, their languages, their histories. Sophia clapped her hands together, her face radiant with joy despite her tears. Perfect, she breathed. Oh, Helena, do you hear? Your granddaughter understands. She knows that real wealth isn't what you accumulate, but what you give away, what you build for those who come after. Maria Helena's expression was complex. Pride and sorrow mingled together. But Marina, child, you've earned the right to keep some of it for yourself, to have security, comfort, the things I could never give you. Marina knelt beside her grandmother's bed, taking both of the old woman's hands in hers. Vovo, you gave me everything that matters. You gave me strength and dignity, and a voice that could stand up to powerful men and make them listen. You taught me that survival isn't enough, that we have an obligation to transform our pain into purpose. How could I dishonor that lesson by hoarding money I don't need? Richard pulled out his phone, already making notes, his business mind engaging with the practical aspects of Marina's vision. We'll need lawyers to structure it properly, he said, but it's doable. More than doable. We can create something that lasts, that continues to grow and help people long after all of us are gone. I'll match your inheritance dollar for dollar. We'll make the Maria Helena Almeida Foundation the most well-funded educational charity in South America. And he looked up, meeting Maria Helena's gaze directly. We'll tell the truth about where the money came from. No more sanitized family histories. Antonio Blackwood's crimes will be documented, acknowledged, used as a cautionary tale about unchecked power and the importance of accountability. Maria Helena studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. You are not your grandfather, Senor Blackwood. You have his eyes, but not his heart. That gives me hope. But she raised one trembling finger in warning. If you do this, if you expose the truth, there will be consequences. Other powerful families won't forgive you for breaking the unspoken rule about protecting dynastic reputations. You'll be shunned, attacked, possibly sued. Are you prepared for that? Richard's smile was grim but determined. Mrs. Santos, I've spent my entire life playing a game whose rules were written by men like my grandfather, accumulating wealth and power for their own sake without questioning the cost to others. Tonight you've shown me a different way. If the price of living with integrity is losing the approval of people who profit from corruption, then that's a price I'm willing to pay. Sophia reached out and placed her hand over Richard's. Welcome to the family, young man. The real family. The one built on truth rather than lies. On redemption rather than denial. You're going to need allies in the fight ahead, and you have them here. The Almeida sisters know something about surviving scandal and building meaning from ruins. We'll help you. Maria Helena coughed, a rattling sound that reminded everyone of her fragility. Marina immediately reached for the water cup, helping her grandmother drink. When Maria Helena could speak again, her voice was weaker but content. I can rest now, she said softly. I can let go knowing the truth is out, that Sophia and I are reconciled, that you, Marina, understand where you come from and have chosen who you want to become. It's more than I ever dared hope for. Marina felt panic clutch at her chest. Don't talk about letting go, Vovo. You're going to get better. We'll use the money to get you better care, better doctors. Richard was already nodding. The best specialists, whatever it takes. Maria Helena shook her head gently. Some things money can't fix, mused Corritos, my dear ones. I'm 84 years old. I've lived through poverty and wealth, through shame and vindication, through separation from my sister and reunion with her. I've raised a granddaughter who has more courage in her little finger than I had in my whole body at her age. I've turned my enemy's weapon against him and used it to help hundreds of young women build better lives. That's enough. Despite everything, Sophia was weeping openly now, her caretaker hovering nearby with tissues. Helena, please, we just found each other again. I can't lose you so soon. Maria Helena reached across and touched her sister's face with infinite gentleness. You never lost me, Sophia. I was always with you, in your heart, in your memories, in the guilt you carried that you never needed to carry. And now you know I forgave you before you even left Brazil, that I understood your choice, that I only ever wanted you to be happy. Take that knowledge and let it bring you peace in whatever time we have left, whether it's days or years. The two sisters held each other as well as they could, given Maria Helena's limited mobility and Sophia's frailty. And Marina witnessed a reconciliation that transcended words, that spoke to something fundamental about human connection and forgiveness. She felt Richard move to stand beside her, and without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. He squeezed back and they stood together watching the sister. These two inheritors of damaged legacies choosing to stand together rather than apart, to build rather than destroy, to honor the past by transforming it into something that could heal the future. In the days that followed that extraordinary night, the story exploded across media outlets. Richard Blackwood's press conference acknowledging his grandfather's crimes and announcing the formation of the Maria Helena Almeida Foundation made international headlines. Some praised his courage and integrity. Others accused him of virtue signaling and betraying his family's legacy. Several board members of Blackwood Industries resigned in protest. 3 major investors pulled their money. Richard's cousin Robert, who had been positioning himself for a hostile takeover, found himself suddenly isolated as younger family members, inspired by Richard's honesty, voted to support the new direction. Marina became briefly famous, the server who had accepted an impossible challenge and uncovered a multi-generational conspiracy. She gave exactly one interview, speaking entirely in Portuguese with subtitles, explaining her grandmother's story and the importance of remembering that behind every fortune there are often forgotten victims. Then she retreated from the spotlight, using her newfound resources and position not for celebrity but for work, traveling to Brazil to meet with the young women who had benefited from her grandmother's secret scholarship fund, to begin building the schools that would carry forward Maria Helena's legacy. Sophia moved into a suite near her sister's care facility, and the two women spent their remaining time together, sometimes talking for hours in Portuguese, sometimes simply sitting in comfortable silence, hands clasped. The gap of 60 years bridged at last. Maria Helena lived for 8 more months, long enough to see the first Maria Helena Almeida School open in São Paulo, long enough to receive letters from dozens of scholarship recipients thanking her for opportunities that had changed their lives, long enough to see her granddaughter transform from a struggling server into a force for educational equity and justice. When Maria Helena finally passed peacefully in her sleep with Marina and Sophia both at her bedside, her funeral was attended by hundreds, powerful people and poor people standing together to honor a woman who had turned suffering into purpose. Richard Blackwood gave a eulogy in carefully practiced Portuguese, speaking of how one person's courage to tell the truth can change the trajectory of family, corporations, and communities. Marina spoke last, and her voice, that voice that had triggered a recognition and started a revolution, rang clear and strong as she recited a Portuguese poem her grandmother had taught her as a child, about phoenixes rising from ashes and justice delayed but never denied. The challenge that had begun as a cruel billionaire's entertainment in an upscale restaurant had become something far larger, a story about the power of language to carry identity and resistance, about the complexity of inheritance, both genetic and moral, about the possibility of redemption and the necessity of truth. Marina Santos, once invisible, had become undeniable, proof that even those whom history tries to erase can rise and claim their voice and demand to be heard. She carried forward 2 bloodlines, the Almeidas with their dignity and the Blackwoods with their power, and she chose to use both in service of something larger than family pride or dynastic legacy. She chose to serve justice, and in doing so, she honored her grandmother's sacrifice and transformed her great-grandfather's crime into a foundation for healing. If this story of courage, truth, and the transformative power of one voice speaking proudly in the language of her ancestors has moved you, then share it with someone who needs to remember that their heritage, whatever it may be, is a source of strength rather than shame. Remember that challenging injustice starts with refusing to be invisible, with speaking up even when powerful people want you to stay silent, honoring those who came before by living with integrity and purpose. Marina's story reminds us that we are not defined by what was done to our ancestors or what our ancestors did to others, but by the choices we make when confronted with difficult truths and impossible inheritances. Subscribe to hear more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things when they refuse to accept that the world as it is must be the world as it remains.